what I talk about is what another version of the culture of death, and that is the veritable commodification of life that's occurred in our society in the last 40 years. Next. There are several challenges to the sanctity of marriage, and you see some of them here. Contraception leads to abortion and divorce and cohabitation, and then all these things lead to infections or other things, or complete commodification of the life that we put children off to the side to lead to the use of artificial insemination and in vitro fertilization, and which ultimately leads to the ability to have new definitions of family and same-sex union. And all these together come up to the commodity of life. You know this data. This is the Guttmacher Institute, which is the research part of Planned Parenthood. And this is their study where they showed that 98 to 99% of Catholics use contraception. Now, they didn't really give an all call to every Catholic asking them what to do and what they do, and seeing where things are. But you have to notice a couple things, and I'm going to take this up because I like to walk. This line right here, this teeny weeny little bitty line right here, of the number of people using natural family planning. And this is the part that we really have to start thinking about in terms of things we talk about. And I've talked to a number of natural family planning instructors over time, and both said nice things, and we've said great things and beautiful things about each other, and I've sparred with them too, so we can get into that later on. But this is the most recent data that's come out. There's a group called, what do they call themselves? The Women, Faith, and Culture Project, that made this really slick-looking thing called What Catholic Women Think. And this just was released in March of this year, which is after the Guttmacher Institute. And we can see that they went and asked about a number of different sociological things. First, they asked about where do these people, these are women of reproductive age, anywhere from, well, they go from age 18 all the way up to age 50, so I guess it's just the edge of reproductive age, and asked them where they learn about the Catholic Church teachings. And you can see the vast majority get their information from homilies and Mass. And you don't see quite as many of these women getting things from where we think that the modern person gets them from blogs, from websites, from books. They still get some from friends, who gosh knows what they get from their friends, and Catholic school, and we all know what's happened in Catholic school over the last generations. And some people look at the catechism, but as some of the results of this test, and I'm not going to show you all the results of this because it would take too long, it would belie yourself as you think about this, what they might have gotten out of it. Next slide. Now, they gave them all this statement. The Catholic Church teaches that sex is designed by God to unite the couple in the most intimate expression of self-giving love and to create the possibility of new life, children. It is wrong to intentionally separate the life-giving and love-giving purposes of sex by using contraception, birth control, and voluntary sterilization, specifically to prevent conception. Each couple must decide in good conscience when and how many children to have, but can never use an immoral method, contraception, birth control, or sterilization, to avoid pregnancy or space their children. Couples who wish to avoid the postponed pregnancy may observe the signs of women's fertility and abstain from sex during those fertile times in natural family planning. Now, this statement does not come from any one Vatican document. It doesn't read like this out of Humanae Vitae, it doesn't read like this out of Dignitatis Personae, Donum Vitae, Evangelium Vitae. It's sort of like a composite of what the Catholic Church position is on it. It's very, very much cogent. It's very, very much there. And you can see that as you go through people who go to church versus not go to church on a regular basis, you see some changes in what they say. Now, yes means they agreed with that, and that's the correct answer. No means they don't agree with that, and of course that's the incorrect correction. And you see that our younger people are doing pretty good. The ones that go to church, about 74% say yes, they agree with that. And 26% say they don't. But look at the generation that I come from, and what we say. We're the ones who are contrarian. And you see, here's the problem. These people taught these people. And that's the biggest concern we have. And why we have the problem we have today with contraception that's led to what you see now at the HHA's mandate, which is leading to people saying, my bishop doesn't speak for me, I speak for myself, I make it up myself, this is what I do, this is how I like it, and all that kind of stuff. Now, the biggest thing is that only 21% of the people who even say yes believe the natural family planning works. They don't even, in this same survey, they believe it's not really right, they believe it's not fair, they don't know if they learned it right, they don't know if they can learn it right, they can't find a teacher, their pastor says it's not good, their pastor says it's really good, and some people, their priests say contraception is good. So you got to be really worried about that as you go down the line. Now, I was asked to talk about two things tonight. One is on contraception, because some of my notoriety comes from the fact that I spoke from a bullhorn in March at the first HHA's mandate thing here in Chicago, and that's one of my bucket list things, you know. Speak to 3,000 people through a bullhorn and only 3 people can hear you. But as a physician who went through an obstetrics and gynecology residency and did all this training and got all these tests and all this kind of stuff, we're aware of these side effects. And what I usually tell people now that I'm teaching my medical students, and they ask me about contraception, is if you really want to write a contraceptive for someone, you have to give them the book. Now, I meant to bring the book because I didn't know how big this would have worked fine, but the book is called Managing Oral Contraception. It's about 200 pages. It's about 7.5 by 10 in terms of its size. It's really on every single OBGYN's bookshelf. It's written by a guy by the name of Richard Dickey. But you have to know everything in the book to really understand what the pill can do. That's not really this physician's guide. That's the instruction book that should come with your pack of pills. And what we don't really do a really good job telling people is if you take the pill, you're going to have all these things. You're going to have weight gain, you're going to have decreased sexual desire, you're going to have vaginal discharges that will come because of the hormone changes that come with the pill. You're going to have changes in menstrual flow. Some people have no menstrual flow, some people have more menstrual flow, some people spot every day, and all that is normal. Now, some teenagers take this because they think and know that it will increase their breast size. And it does a little bit, but not, you're not going to become Snooki or anything like that. It can raise your blood pressure, and there are some pills that really can help with acne. That really is true. But you have, like I talked about the breakthrough bleeding, and they get nauseous, and they get headaches, and urinary tract infection, and depression, and their gums can inflame, and all kinds of things like this. And I always say this is the point. We victimize women in the current age. We've done it so well. The young women victimize themselves willingly. But men would never take a pill that could do all those things. Would do any of those things. They'd run clear to the hills for that. And if that was all, that'd be great. But wait, there's more. There are 4 things that can actually kill you if you take the pill. You can have a blood clot. You can have certain increases in cancer. You can have lethal infections and more violent death. Now, the blood clotting itself, that's the #1 problem with the pill, and that's something if you actually read the package insert that comes with the pills in a big black box. And you're trained to say, well, your increase goes up 6 times if you take the pill, but if you get pregnant, it goes up 8 times. So, pill's actually safer. And everyone's going to come out and tell you that the pill prevents cancer. You read that everywhere, and it does. It does. You have decreased endometrial cancer, you have decreased cervical cancers. No, not cervical. Endometrial, ovarian, and colorectal. Isn't that nice? Now, if I took all the incidence of those 3 cancers and put them all together, I might get a little bit more than the incidence of cervical cancer, which increases. And if I took all of that, if I took that and tried to put it against breast cancer, it'd be paled against. And the increases you see on breast cancer with the pill are similar to the increases that everyone kind of runs to the hills for when you see estrogen replacement. And here's the thing, it's two humps, we call it a bimodal thing, two humps to this risk. The older one we know about, but young women taking the pill for the first time within 6 to 12 months have a significantly increased risk of a certain type of breast cancer that is deadly. Nobody tells them that. As a matter of fact, you go to Planned Parenthood, which is what everybody tells you to do, and you can get it for $3. They just kind of say, hey, what you want to be safe out there now, and they give you a pack of pills. Why? Because 2 weeks ago I was at a conference with a bunch of abortionists speaking out, and I listened to every single one of them who work for Planned Parenthood say exactly that that's what they told people when they gave them the pill. And by the way, there are many of those people that still think the pill is fine. And I'll get to that in a minute. Now, this lethal infection thing is something you can't really wrap your brain about. But women who are on the pill are more likely to get HIV, to transmit HIV, and more likely to get infected with HPV. But of course, we can fix that because we can just give you a Gardasil when you're 9 years old, and you won't get HPV. Well, you might not get HPV because there's like 100 subtypes of HPV, and Caruso protects against 2 that cause cancer and 2 that cause warts. That's it. There's a new one that only does the 2 against cancer. Go ahead. But we have to remember this. This is what the culture of death says, that the total risks of birth control are much less than the total risks of a pregnancy. Boy, I really, really would have loved to hear President Obama last night come out and say that pregnancy was a disease. You know he believes it. Okay, and we can do anything we possibly can to prevent it. That's going to be in the best interest of everybody. You know? I mean, one of the reasons I was late today was because I was going to have to do a cesarean section. I was able to pass that off on somebody. Actually, they were delivering twins, so yeah, it got delayed and I could push it off. But I wanted to delay it off a long time, because you know what? It just hit me. The woman who's going to have the C-section, who probably is having it right now, 15 years old.
Oh my God.
The girl who just delivered twins, 18 years old. I mean, we see decreases in teen pregnancy, we do. But it's still a huge problem. And one that we're not doing a very good job at preventing, either because we're not giving people the education they need to be, or we're too lax in giving them contraceptive devices to tell them they're going to be safe. But the reason why people get these infections, the reason why cervical cancer is higher in pill users is because women who are on the pill can completely shut off the 2 parts of sex and now use it for enjoyment purposes, which was what Marilyn Sanger originally wanted it to do. But they don't think about the other consequences because as far as they're concerned, that those consequences don't exist. Now, I didn't put a slide in about this, but you have to know that about 7% of people on the pill who take the pill in any 1 month ovulate. And so some people do get pregnant when they're on the pill, and some people don't get pregnant and might lose their baby on the pill, and how they lose it, it's not because the egg doesn't fertilize, it's not because it doesn't make it down the tube, it just doesn't have a good environment to implant. And unfortunately, we call those things abortifacients. So the pill can be an abortifacient. And so, you know, if you needed to have any justification for the pro-life cause to be at least a little bit in arms about contraception, there you go. That's there. And now they have IUDs out, and and there's a paper that just came out last week that says that they encourage ACOG, my union, says that it's the best option for teenagers to get intrauterine devices, which are on the rise. They're very popular in Europe, and they can keep them in forever because they think that people can have multiple partners with them and not get infections, that they can be fine. But we do know that the IUD, one of the mechanisms of the IUD is to prevent implantation in addition to preventing ovulation. So you have a whole new group of people who could be doing things that they shouldn't be doing, and they're getting it all by the blessing of the government. Next. I love to put up at this point why Catholics should believe this. And you have to understand, if you ever want to have a great read about the stuff that happened around the promulgation of Humanae Vitae. Because if you understand that, you will understand why there's a need for Students for Life, why there's a need for pro-life ministries, why we need these things in the first place. And the reason is because people from Rome itself tried to play politics with the Catholic Church. And when Pope Paul came out with Humanae Vitae, people just turned around and said, overall, we're just not going to do this. And how we're not going to do this is we're just not going to tell the faithful about it. We're not going to teach it. We're not going to be there. But you have to know this. Just 100 years ago. 100 years ago. Now that sounds like a long time ago, but it's not. Every single church in the world, outlawed contraception. It was only in 1930 that the Lambeth Conference allowed for contraception in the Protestant church. And in 30 years, they tried to push it down the throats of the Catholic people. But what Pope Paul did was became a prophet. And he made these 4 prophecies. One, that contraception would lead to conjugal infidelity. Well, I don't have to say anything more about that. They would lead to a lowering of morality. We call that the culture of death. Cultures will lead men to cease respecting women in their totality and cause them to treat women as mere instruments of selfish enjoyment. And we see that on television, we see that on the radio. And I just said, I have young kids, I have teenage daughters, I fight it every day. Women objectify themselves now in the name of fashion. And then they wonder why they get the attention they get. I mean, the high school dances all over Chicagoland are being canceled. And it's not because people are being drinking or using drugs, it's because the girls come in wearing nighties. Not really knowing, really, seriously, not even knowing what their effect of what they're wearing is going to have on the 17-year-old boy who has no control over himself, because he's 17 years old, on a dance floor. I mean, it's just sick. And then the last, that widespread would lead to a massive imposition of contraception by unscrupulous governments. Well, HHS mandate. What happened in the Philippines this past year, where they forced down the approved contraception there. And that's just the beginning of the pie. Go ahead. Now, this is what we believe as Catholics. A child is not something owed to one, but it's a gift. And it's the supreme gift of marriage, and it's a human person. These are big, big, big things. It's not a piece of property, an ideal to which an alleged right to a child would lead to that. That's not what we have. Children are a gift. And in the later writings, we see that from the moment of fertilization, that this life is a human life with an unconditional respect and moral rights, and because the embryo is a person, it has to be cared for as if any other person. And this is the other half of this, which is what leads to, all these things lead to, which is infertility, which I can tell you is an epidemic in the United States. We're talking about something that's about 10% of the U.S. couples in the United States. That's lots and lots of people. Okay, go ahead. Now, we fire it's our definition problem. In the United States, because we cannot wait for anything, we say it's 1 year of attempting pregnancy without any success. In Europe, they call it 3 years, because the difference is by 3 years, pretty much everyone who's going to get pregnant does. Okay? In 1 year, about 2 to 3% of the people who were going to get pregnant anyway are still out there. And they use this to try to help them show off how good they can be at making people pregnant. Infertility treatments have really evolved over time. And I like to think a lot of times what happened before we had all these things. Well, in the 50s, we had primitive ovulation induction. And these ovulation induction methods were really came from animal husbandry and that kind of stuff. So it was really, really bad. They didn't have good stuff, it didn't work really well. And surgery was the primary thing. In the 70s, we started to get into more microsurgical thing. We started to be able to do outpatient surgery with laparoscopy. We started to be able to do little bitty things with fallopian tubes. In the 80s and 90s, when I sort of began to come involved in this, we did empiric therapies. This is where many of the drugs which we have today really came into vogue, and some of the procedures we do now have come into vogue. The 90s is the age of assisted reproduction and the age of acronyms. Everything is named something cute. Art, ICSI, Susie, gift. These are all things that came in the 90s. And the 2000, the new century has led to an increase in in vitro fertilization. Why is this a problem? Well, this is I love to show this slide. This is the median age of first marriage from 1890 to 2010. This is the 40s and 50s. That's low. That's baby boom. This is now. And you can see that women are getting married older now, but they're still in that time that they can get pregnant. It's just that it probably costs them 1 or 2 pregnancies in this period of time from here. Next. And then this is the percentage of first births age mothers 1970 to 2006. And this is just for this part of the graph. This big part of the graph is the women having their first child at age 35 or above. This line is 1978. This is Louise Brown. This is the first IVF baby. So you can see that since the first IVF baby, we now see a significant number of people having their first child up to the age of 35, which was unheard of before 1970. Next. Then is intrauterine insemination. This is the first thing that they did to try to combat IVF, believe it or not. This, we think insemination has been around since the time of the gods, but it's only been around really as a procedure we do since the 1980s. And what they thought initially would be just as good as in vitro fertilization, but over time they found that this is no better at getting people pregnant than conjugal activity. So we do it mostly as a way to throw the kitchen sink at people when they're getting all the treatments they need to get. And then this is the big doc. This is in vitro fertilization, where we take and give you medicines to make eggs. That's the thing in the corner there. Then we do an ultrasound. We place a needle inside and draw out the eggs by an aspiration. This is what an egg looks like. Then we put them in a dish, and we might put sperm around it and let things go on their own, or we might force a sperm on it in a procedure known as intracytoplasmic sperm injection, or ICSI. About 60% of these eggs will fertilize. Then we incubate them for a few days, and then we put them back in the uterus through a bypass procedure. So it's a big tubal bypass procedure, but it's supposed to basically improve the chances of pregnancy. When they fertilize, this is what it looks like. This is called a zygote, which you learned in high school. We call them a 2-pronuclear, 2PN. And beginning of the last month, I was in Costa Rica fighting with, we can talk about that later, and there are people that saying that that was not alive. But somehow we got from having one egg to something that looks like that, and if I put it into culture and leave it alone, it will divide like this. This is a 3-day embryo. This is the stage that goes in the uterus called a blastocyst. That's the part that naturally appears. And these are all areas which we've transferred over time into the uterus to create pregnancies. And this is, can we start this? No, back up. Could you try to start this? This is something I show people as time-lapsed. If you're still curious about whether this is life, it's one thing to see it in static pictures. It's another thing when you see it over time. This is a 5-day lapsed photograph from the cinemascope. No one's doing anything. This is happening all on its own. And at the end, what happens is the embryo actually hatches from its eggshell. So chickens come out at the end, and humans come out at the beginning. We've gotten really good at this. Now, in nature, 1 out of every 5 times, a woman and man who try to get pregnant every month have about a 1 in 5 chance of getting pregnant, so about 20% in best case scenario. And I've heard some of the people who do this in other ways kind of throw the numbers around, but it still boils down to 1 in 5. And in vitro fertilization is still much better. So the pregnancies and live births are over 40% now. And this is really what's driving this. We know that people lose their ability to get pregnant as they get older. And you see, this is part of that other graph I showed you about the 35-year-old. This is 35. Here's 25. You see there's a big difference in the chance of getting pregnant over these times. But we can fix that too. Go ahead. We can use oocyte donation. So for ovarian failure, genetically transmitted disease, periodical decreased ovarian reserve. Old people, okay? We can make anybody pregnant this way. And what we do is we put ads up on places like college campuses, and we do it in community centers, we do it online, whatever. We'll pay you 50 grand for one round of in vitro fertilization where we can take all your eggs out, put them in a dish, and use them for other people. And guess what? You can do this 6 times and just be fine. And at $20,000 to $50,000 a pop, hey, that's pretty good money. It's all tax-free because no one's making you sign anything. So. Okay, go ahead. And you see, we fixed it. When we use donor oocytes, the curve that goes down with age gets straight line. So this is the 50-year-old people in Hollywood who have babies and twins and triplets. That's all doing this. Next. So now there are 18 ways to make a baby that have nothing to do with sex. At least. This was a PBS production in 2001. So when I saw this, I thought, what about now? Well, came up with all these. There's like 25 of them here. And I could probably come up with another 25 more. Essentially, based on the idea that we can use a donor egg or a surrogate uterus, or a regular egg or a regular sperm from one guy, we can take any sperm, any guy, from any multiplicity of guys, any egg from one woman or another woman, any uterus from any other place, and we can make a baby. So this is what allows same-sex marriage to create the new normal. Next. But there are risks to this procedure. Number one, the drugs we use stimulate the ovaries, and it's very easy to overstimulate you. So you can get swollen ovaries, they can leak into the body, it can make you dehydrated, it can shut down the kidneys, shut down the liver, it can be fatal. There are people that this happens to maybe once or twice a year, to the point where they almost die, but you never hear about it. Right. This is what ovarian hyperstimulation looks like. Those are all cysts on that ovary. That ovary naturally is about 1/10 of its size. Go ahead. Oh, keep going. I want to skip this one. Go ahead. All right. So you can also do. You can also have bleeding and injuries or whatever. Now we'll tell people who are going to donate their eggs this, but it's the fine print in an IVF consent. Because let's think about this. If I really told you, you could get pregnant or you could die, okay? The guy, the husband, would never let that happen, right? I mean, if he loved his wife, if he said there's a chance that you might die during this procedure, he'd never let it happen. So we don't know this. You know, a lot of guys don't think it's going to work anyway. So it's one thing. So to put additional risks on top of it really kind of tilts the ball. But the big thing you hear about is multiple pregnancy, right? So you have twins, triplets. You can have several embryos that are implanted to ensure pregnancy. We have people. This is one of the cures. The people who don't want to put embryos in a freezer, they put more embryos in than they should, and you wind up with a high-order multiple pregnancy. And this is what they look like. So over there's a pair of twins, there's triplets, there's counting 6 of them in that one. This is how Octomom had her kids. This is, you see that all the line of whatever, next. And we can fix this too with selective reduction, which is a euphemism, right? I got asked last year to comment on the New York Times situation. They thought that maybe I would think differently about this, that if there were 6 embryos in a uterus, I would be okay with reducing them to triplets or twins, which they found out that was not what they were going to get from me. But what horrified me was the New York Times actually wrote a story that there are women out there taking triplets and twins and reducing them to singletons. Now, any pregnancy that's beyond 1 is a high-risk pregnancy, but to do that, it just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. But if I wasn't leaving the field because of my Catholic beliefs, I would leave it because of this. Last year, they came up with a study from Denmark which actually was good enough that it wound up in every single obstetrician's recertification packet this year, that showed that all ovarian cancers 15 years after an in vitro retrieval increased by 50%. And invasive ovarian cancers are tripled, and the borderline ovarian cancer, which everyone kind of says, okay, borderline ovarian cancer, that's like a little cancer, but it's not. People die of borderline ovarian cancers, doubled within 10 years of an in vitro fertilization cycle. And this is what the current status of in vitro fertilization is in the United States. You know, I point out that I got into the field here, and I left the field here, but now take these people and add 15 years to them. You see, the first IVF baby was in 1978, the first American IVF baby was in 1981. Okay, it took a while for it to get going, so we're just beginning to get into the early 90s where we're making more. So now we see the real takeoff of this, and if we're gonna see a risk of ovarian cancer start to go up, we're gonna start seeing it within the next 5 to 10 years. And it's something we're gonna have to watch. We know that IVF babies are sicker. They have lower birth rates. They have more physical problems, typically more likely to have cerebral palsy, more likely to have developmental delays. And this isn't just because you have a higher rate of multiple pregnancy. It's got something to do with the actual fact that this is an IVF pregnancy. And it's kind of funny to watch in the literature as they try to explain it. They don't just say, no, it doesn't happen. They say, you know, it's because we use this, or because we use that, or we use this, and really no one's coming down to the baseline is that we did something that was not natural to somebody to make a baby that was manufactured not by God, but by human. Keep going. These are all the things that we've seen in one study that show up in IVF babies, in the head, the GI tract, and the kidney. But the biggest problem that I have, and the one that I talk about the most, is the psychological problems of people who don't get pregnant with these things. You know, you already have people who have put everything on the line. They've already gotten their degrees, they waited to get married, they waited to have children for that time, whatever that might be. They use contraception during that time, they come off of it, and then they try to get pregnant because they thought, you know, I'll get pregnant in April, and it didn't happen. So they freaked out, they went to the local guy, they said, I'm going to do in vitro fertilization, we're going to do it a couple times, and we're going to have these problems. And again, just today, wow, today was a big day. Just today, my brand new student came to me and said, you know, I just had the most sad case, we did a D&C. It wasn't that bad, for a woman who was 18 weeks pregnant. And the baby was only measuring like 10 weeks, and it was an IVF pregnancy, and it was her second try at IVF. And she's just despondent. There's no consoling her that this didn't happen. And go on that way. Well, that happens because you raise the bar so high, you make promises that are so grand. Don't think about that. I would sit down with you and I would tell you, you've got a 50-50 chance of getting pregnant. So you flipped a coin and it worked, and then you lost it. That's terrible. But it gets worse because we're seeing that women now who don't get pregnant with IVF have pre-PTSD. They have symptoms that are part of this. And we say to people, you say, you know, I get asked, well, you have, like all people, you know, it's a $1 billion industry, so you got people lined up to take care of these people, right? You got the, you know, because that's what we do. When people have problems in school, we send in counselors and other things, whatever. And the answer to that question is we do bupkis. If you don't get pregnant, you leave. We never see you again. You might go to my sister clinic down the street. You might bounce around all over the place. But you get lost to follow-up. And this creates terrible problems in marriages, because terrible problems in depression. It's underdiagnosed completely. There are people who are trained to take care of these people. My wife is one of them. However, people do not take advantage of them. They do not refer to these people because no one believes, none of the people in the place believe it's important enough to try to inoculate these women with a little bit of care. So we become like Dr. Frankenstein. And you know, when I was leaving the University of Chicago, I gave my final grand rounds. I gave it on to treatment of infertility, and it was done around this time, so around October. And I actually had clips from Young Frankenstein I would throw in there every so often to remind people that we're no better than this, that we're no better than the world that this came from. Because remember, Frankenstein is a creation of Mary Shelley, who wrote her book during the first throes of the sexual revolution, and it's the same stuff that she was writing about that's led to what we have today. We also know that IVF pregnancies are more likely to be abnormal. And this is the second part. If ovarian cancer is the first part, this is the second part that would have led me to leave the field without my Catholic belief. This is the likelihood of an abnormality in terms of natural conception. You know, when you get pregnant on your own, you don't necessarily have a normal kid. This is what happens during IVF. This is a change of almost 40%. So there's a 40% chance, of increased chance of having a child with an abnormality just by virtue of the fact that you had in vitro fertilization, because we played with something we probably shouldn't have. And we know that there's musculoskeletal defects and cardiac defects and other problems with the limbs. So what we have to do is we have to start thinking back to our Catholic beliefs. Remember, you know, tying all this together for you somewhat, and I probably went over my time, I apologize. But the thing is that we have to think about life in all of its forms and where it goes, and what we do as people who are tremendous faith in trying to bring to the people who come after us a better life. You know, we should not have to have conferences like this anymore. We should not have to have students for life. We shouldn't have to have priests for life. We should be a community and of believers that holds life up as its primary goal in all of its forms. Now, people say that they don't know who this is. And maybe you don't. This is St. Gianna. And she was the first woman that the church recognized who actually died in childbirth. She was a pediatrician. And she chose to take the risks of dying rather than abort her child because she was sick. And she's Italian, and she was beatified by John Paul II a few years ago. And she's the patron that I use for everything that I try to do now. And I always echo this thing from the Pope, which he said in January, that it's imperative that the entire Catholic community in the United States come to realize the grave threats to the Church's public moral witness presented by a radical secularism which finds increasing expression in the political and cultural spheres. And he was talking, you know, in Italy, but he was talking to us because we are the lights for the rest of the world as Americans. And what we do as Catholics in this country will be seen by other Catholics across the world. They're looking for us to lead them. And we have got to lead them in all of our spheres. One of the ways we're doing this is with this, House Resolution 212, which is Paul Ryan's, and it's got, I don't know, 57 people. This is the, this is called the, I don't know what they call it, but what will happen if this occurs is that they will define life as beginning at fertilization. It's been tried now in 34 states. It's currently ongoing. They're called personhood bills. And what they would do is they would define life as beginning at fertilization, which is what Catholics believe. But anybody who believes in life has to believe. If this happens, it's really kind of meant to make the Roe v. Wade, go away. Because I mean, if that's the law, well, what are we talking about now? But the untoward effect is it may restrict in vitro fertilization, because now we're talking about making situations where you can freeze your embryos and not just put them in there fresh, and we can save them for later. And we don't even have to do it. We just make a bunch of eggs, put them in a freezer, come back later, and put them back. And then we get all these things. And now we've got 2 million of these things in the United States. People say it was 250,000, 300,000. 15 years ago, 10 years ago, the Chicago Tribune wrote an article talking about frozen embryos, and then they estimated in Chicago there were 250,000 frozen embryos in Chicago. You know, so put that out there with 147,000. You can do the math. 150,000 a year IVF. They get 2 frozen embryos a year for 10 years. That's millions of frozen embryos out there. And there's nothing we can do about that. But this is a point in the right direction. And I always end with this. This is the Ephesians chapter 3, which is the one that's controversial. It's the one that says, you know, wives be subservient to your husbands. But in order to really understand it, you have to know the whole thing. And basically what it says, we're all a member of the body of Christ. And the other side of that, women be subjected to your husbands, is men, you have to love your wives like Christ loves the church. Christ died for his church. So, I don't know who gets the better end of the deal. But the point is that, but even in the submission, it's really a teamship. And a teamship is being cooperative with God. And whether we're talking about things in any kind of life, where we have to try to look at the most basic thing, is what we've done with contraception, abortion, and individual fertilization. Is we've removed God from the bedroom. We no longer have a situation where when couples who are married come together, they give themselves over to God and follow God's will. And it's not an easy thing to do. I'll tell you, I try to do it every day, and it's like being on a roller coaster. But the thing is that it's the only way to do this. And once people can get God back into their, get back into the bedroom, then you'll see many of these problems go away. And with that, I'll turn over to the next speaker, and I guess I'll be around to answer questions later.